Good evening. This is Listening in Radio. The comments, ideas, and opinions of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of WRMI. And good evening. This is Gene Stevens, and this is Listening in Radio. This show was pre-recorded, so by the time you hear this episode of Listening in Radio, it will be 2024. So hey, a very happy New Year to the entire world. I hope that you all had a peaceful Christmas and a peaceful holiday with your families. I hope we're looking forward to what 2024 could bring. I think things are looking up in the world, and let's pray to God that this year will be better than the last. And now it's time for Radio News. Did you know that there are over 1,600 Christian radio stations in the U.S., 14 of which are on shortwave? Most Christian radio stations, as well as programmers based in the United States, are members of the National Religious Broadcasters, a Christian organization. There are reportedly 1,600 Christian broadcasting organizations in the United States, and they range from single stations to expansive networks. It is common for religious broadcasters to purchase small broadcast translators to create networks that stretch across like large regions. Moody Radio was the first example and still one of the largest in the world, though most of its stations broadcast standalone programming as well as network feeds. Some examples of this are Way FM Network, K-Love, Air One, The Joy FM, Reach Radio, 3ABM Radio, Radio 74, and the Bible Broadcasting Network. So these are just notable examples. And the reason I mention this is I support Christian radio, and I fear that there's an ominous shift that we are seeing in American politics that could possibly lead to more censorship. Censorship of biblically based principles and ethics, because I believe that the Bible is an intensive study in God's ethics and rules for humankind. And I strongly feel that Christian broadcasting here on shortwave is clearly protected under the First Amendment. And there are also indeed controversial ideas and news that are spoken about here on shortwave. And I also believe that those ideas are protected speech. Does everybody out there know the mighty KBC? Do you know the mighty KBC? Did you know it's a radio station that can be found on shortwave, digital, DAB, and online? The mighty KBC is a trucker radio station, and it's found on 6095 kilohertz. But I've heard the mighty KBC on the 19-meter band and via WRMI relay on 5950 kilohertz. For more information about the mighty KBC, you can visit www.kbcradio.eu, and you'll find a lot more info there. They have a great website, and you can also drop a signal report online through a format that they have there, and you'll get a very nice printable QSL. And moving on, did anybody else here participate in the ARRL 10-meter contest on December 9th and 10th? Boy, I did, and I had a lot of fun. You know, there's a lot of contests out there, but I love 10 meters. And when 10 meters is open, man, it's so great because you can talk to people all over the world, and conditions are very good. You know, I love it, but I know many others do. I'm part of a Discord page here in central Iowa called the Iowa Radio Operators, and every time 10 meters is open in our neck of the woods, boy, we just jump up there and say, hey, 10 meters is open. Get on and operate. It's a great band because when it opens up, the world is open to you. And it's also a good place for new hams coming in who have 2-meter privileges, but you can go on 10-meter radio. You could do code there. You could talk to people all over the world. That was my first experience with HF, and that's why I became a general eventually. But the contest was on December 9th and 10th. I mainly did code myself, but band conditions were really, really great. It was really like shooting fish in a barrel. What a great time I had. I made at least 30 or 40 contacts, so it was really good stuff. And this is a story that I've been tracking for the last couple of months, and I'll continue to track this story until the situation is resolved. And this is in reference to the AM radio in Every Vehicle Act. And I actually located this online looking for more information, and it was on the Texas Tribune Online website. but it's in reference to Ted Cruz, who's the sponsor of this bill. And the story reads, Ted Cruz pushes for car manufacturers to keep AM radio a tool for emergency communication and conservative talk. Cruz on Tuesday requested a unanimous consent decision on his AM radio for every vehicle act. The legislation was blocked by Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, a Republican from Kentucky. That's kind of shocking, in my opinion, who said the mandate on private companies would be an overstep of congressional power. Okay. And it reads further, Texas-led bill that would mandate AM radio capability in car manufacturing was blocked from passing Senate on Tuesday. Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, requested a unanimous consent decision on his AM for every vehicle act. The legislation was blocked by Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, who said the mandate on private companies would be an overstep of congressional power. For months, Cruz has pushed for vehicle manufacturers to retain AM radio and new car models to protect emergency communication channels and diverse content. He partnered with Senator Ed Markey, a Democrat from Massachusetts, in May, and it was introduced into legislation, and at the time it had broad bipartisan support in the Senate. A corresponding bill was introduced in the House and has 191 co-sponsors, including 2 Democrats and 12 Republicans from Texas. And it goes on to say AM radio is enormously important to millions of Texans. Cruz told the Texas Tribune in October. He noted that the platform is essential for diverse talk radio, especially conservative voices. He stated, I think silencing those voices is enormously harmful to both free speech, but also to a robust democratic process. On the Senate floor Tuesday, Cruz pointed to conservative commentators Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levine, Sean Hannity, or Glenn Beck, who all found audiences on AM radio. AM radio is a haven for people to speak, even if their views are disfavored by political ruling class, Cruz said on the Senate floor. Rush Limbaugh would not exist without AM radio. The views of my friend, Rand Paul in parentheses, the senator from Kentucky, would be heard by many fewer people without AM radio. And I'm just chiming in here. I agree with what Ted Cruz is saying, and I agree. AM radio in rural Texas and in rural Iowa, and I'm adding on here, and rural Iowa and rural Wyoming and rural Missouri and rural Wisconsin. The list goes on and on. In these rural areas and other southern states is also a platform for religious, local news and sports programming. Local stations will also run chain or network programming with more well-known commentators, which is very true, according to Elle Cross, director of the Institute for Rural Journalism and Community Issues. Some of the rural communities are dependent on getting local interest information from a single radio station or a single newspaper, Cross said. Again, that is true. If you allow the manufacturers to not put AM in cars, then you're killing off the essential part of the media landscape of the United States, Cross said. Supporters of the bill also point to AM radio's importance as a means to protect emergency communication channels. A fall 2022 Nielsen survey showed AM radio reached over 80 million Americans monthly. During times of disaster, AM radio is consistently the most resilient form of communications, Cruz said. AM radio is used as an alert system by federal, state, and local agencies to communicate in times of disaster. When other forms of communication fail, like during power outages, and of course, tornadoes, storms, which is regular, it's very regular here in Iowa. Cruz said he was confident that the legislation would pass overwhelmingly if brought to the floor for a vote. But since it was blocked on Tuesday, it now awaits a scheduling by Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Okay then. The congressional pressure already provoked change in the industry. Days after the bills were introduced in May, the CEO of Ford announced that the company would keep AM radio in 2024 models. Car companies started cutting AM radio capacity to simplify manufacturing and because of assumptions that Americans consumers don't find AM radio necessary, according to Oscar Rodriguez, the president of the Texas Association of Broadcasters. Companies also make revenue from car owners' subscription only radio services. Let me say that again, subscription only radio services. It became very clear very quickly that the automakers that this is a highly valued service that is extraordinarily important. Rodriguez said, it's not just an entertainment service, it is an emergency communication service. AM station signals cover 90% of the American population, according to the National Association of Broadcasters, and are able to continue operations during power outages. But a number of national trade associations have defended manufacturers' rights to exclude AM radio, arguing that FM radio, internet access, and text emergency alerts can replace AM radio. This is giving preference to technology that is facing fierce competition, said India Herdman, manager of policy affairs for the Consumer Technology Association. A FEMA strategic plan pointed out that Americans are moving away from radio and broadcast television as primary sources of news and information. One reason for emergency managers to prioritize alerts to smartphones or other methods. Herdman said that the mandate for AM radio contradicts previous congressional actions authorizing federal funding, updated emergency communications. While we are spending those appropriate dollars for, or if we just, or we're just going to go back to using century-old technology, Herdman said. But in a state like Texas with significant or a significant rural population, proponents of AM broadcasting argue access is the key. Cooper Little, executive director of the Independent Cattlemen's Association, said Texans and agricultural sectors rely on AM radio for reports on livestock and markets, as well as severe weather alerts. Things happen in a moment's notice, said Little, in areas where there is not necessarily cell service. That's how you spread the word. And I just want to add to this a little bit, and I'm really kind of shocked that Rand Paul took the perspective and the side that he did with this, because to say that the government does not regulate or has no right to regulate businesses, then a lot of things would fall in line with it. After all, isn't the firearms industry regulated? It is. It is heavily regulated. What about the Motor Carrier Safety Act? Isn't the trucking industry regulated? What about the FRA for the railroads? Is not the railroads heavily regulated? They are. And we're not asking, and nobody's asking the car manufacturers to do something that they've never done before. There is nothing unusual about having an AM radio in your vehicle. This is something that goes back to day one with motor vehicles. And again, it's nothing new, and there's no big technology leap here to ensure that an AM radio, AM FM radio, and hooked into a CD player or a Sirius XM, which they're all on the same radios now. Nobody's asking them to do anything different at this point. But what is different today is everything is going to end up behind a paywall. Now, this is just my opinion. I'm opinionating, but everything's going to end up behind a paywall, including any extra accessories you want in your electric vehicle. Do they want to put the kill switch in our vehicle? Yes. Do they want to put the kill switch on radio? Yes. Do they want to put the kill switch on the internet? Absolutely. They've already talked about that. So I'm really kind of lost on the direction this has gone to. I don't think that there's any big hairy deal with allowing car manufacturers or mandating car manufacturers just to continue to put the same types of radios they've been putting in since the first day that a radio was put into an automobile. But I'm pontificating there. That's my opinion. I'm sure everybody else has their opinion, but that's my stance on it. And now for radio questions. In this segment of Listening In, I reach out to other ham radio operators, shortwave listeners, medium wave DXers, and other radio enthusiasts, and I ask their opinions on various aspects of the radio hobby. Last month, I asked for input on the following question. Do you think that ham radio is more component-driven or more technical? Meaning, do ham radio operators still build and service their own equipment, or do they buy and use equipment and throw it away at the end of its service life? I actually got enough answers to fill an entire show, and I just might do that one day. One ham radio operator by the name of Nick, KC0UCJ, told me he thinks the UHF and VHF folks tend to buy more and they use that gear until it reaches the end of its service life and then they relocate it to the trash. But in contrast to that, people who dabble in QRP radio, meaning low power radios, which generally refers to the many ham radio operators who use low powered CW Morse code rigs at 5 watts or less, tend to build some of their own gear. I concur with Nick on that because there are many QRP related kits available on the market. Kits range from small code transceivers, CW decoders, and paddles. And by the way, another thing that's come up that's really interesting that's fueling the kit side of the ham radio hobbies is 3D printers. Hams are using 3D printers to create a variety of homebrew components such as housing and CW paddles and other parts. It's really interesting. Other opinions on this question tended to gravitate towards the more component-driven part of the hobby, or as another ham radio operator referred to this part of it as appliance use rather than technical know-how. But there's definitely a shift in how we define the technical part of ham radio. Ham radio operator Paul, W0YR, told me this. He said the complexity and miniaturization of modern electronics has steered us, and this is probably intentional, by the way, away from building radios into experimenting with how to integrate, interact, and interface with radio. And I agree with him. I think a company like MFJ Electronics, they figured that part out a while back because MFJ has frequently produced a multitude of accessories for the ham shack. Another advancement in this in this thinking pertains to trying to figure out how to drive SDR or software-defined radio with Raspberry Pi, which those of you who don't know what Raspberry Pi is basically a computer about the size of your cell phone. Your cell phone probably has just as much computing power as a Raspberry Pi does, but the Raspberry Pi is a microcomputer that a lot of hams kind of fell in love with. It's this micro-size thing, and are intrigued with it over the last few years and trying to figure out how to interface that. So that was last month's question. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw in this month's question for January, because I already got a lot of answers as soon as I put it out in the public eye. So a lot of people wanted to jump into the conversation. But this month's question was very simple. I asked which type of antenna is best for shortwave reception. C. Crane recommends 100 feet of wire, and I concur with that. 100 feet of wire is definitely the way to go. I have 175 feet myself with a breadbox tuner, and I use that, and it works rather well for me. But here's some of the responses I got. But I want to mention this right up front because my favorite response that I got it was one radio operator said, the best antenna you have is the one you have until you build another one. This is so true because the three most important things about your radio, the three most important components of your radio are this: your antenna, and your antenna. And for a new ham radio operator or shortwave listener, it is, in my opinion, a rite of passage for a new ham radio operator or a new shortwave listener to build your own antenna. And it's one thing we can do from scratch. We don't need a kit. We just need a small set of instructions. And it kind of segues well with last month's question about building your own gear. But the long wire antenna seems to be still, till this very day, of many ham radio operators and many shortwave listeners, that long wire is still the choice. And that makes sense to me because wire antennas are easily built. You either tune them with a tuner or you cut them to the band you want to monitor. So it's still the choice of radio operators. Hi, this is Gene from Listening in Radio. And I just want to say that I'm not new to radio communications, and I've always had a love for all different types of modes of radios, from ham radio to AM radio and to many other forms of communications. But I am new to this podcast, and we're new to WRMI. And I'm hoping to see Listening in Radio grow and stay on shortwave. But it does cost money to do the program, and I'm still trying to figure out how to support and grow Listening in Radio. And I want to hear from you, the listener, if you have any comments or questions, or hey, if you'd like to support Listening in Radio, you could drop me a line at listeninginradio@protonmail.com. And that's all one word, listeninginradio@protonmail.com. and drop me a line, say hi, and let's talk, and we'll see what your interests are. And if you like this program, I'd certainly like to hear a little bit more from you about what you might expect from the program. And if you'd like to support us, I'd love to hear from you also. But again, this is Gene from Listening in Radio, KB9001 MWDX, KB9001 SWL, KB9001 SSB, and of course, my ham radio call sign is WN9ZWC. I look forward to hearing from anybody and everybody. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to Listening in Radio, and welcome to Radio Spotlight. Tonight, we're going to be breaking down the Ritechus TR629 AM/FM shortwave radio. I own one of these radios, and I specifically purchased it because I wanted to participate in the worldwide shortwave contest and the Top 10 DX contest. And the first contest ran from November, and it's going to go till December 31st, so it's almost over with. In the Top 10 DX contest will last until the end of this month, but I participated in both, and I submitted my logs for Top 10 already, and I'm getting ready to submit my logs for the Worldwide Shortwave Contest. I did pretty well. I've logged about 66 countries so far. I think pretty good from where I'm sitting at my location, so I'm really happy with that. And probably just as many medium wave DX contacts, but the thing is, with the Worldwide Shortwave Contest, we were logging both shortwave and medium wave, but we're only allowed to use one from the United States. So I logged about 60 plus medium wave DX stations around the United States on the Ritechus, and there was a mixture on the Ritechus and my CC Radio EP Pro. So there's that anyway. But let me break down the Ritechus 629 for you, because I think it's a solid radio, and I think it was well worth the price. I paid around $45 for the Ritechus, and I'm pretty happy with it. It's, like I said, it's a solidly built radio, and it has some bells and whistles on it. But let me go over what I've discovered about the 629. So for one thing, it is AM/FM shortwave. On the AM band, it is 522 kilohertz to 1620 kilohertz. So you don't have that next few spaces on the dial up. It does not go to 1710 kilohertz. It only goes to 1620. Whether that's detrimental to me or not, it probably isn't. For some serious medium wave DXers, that might be an issue later down the road. But anyway, continuing. The shortwave band is from 2300 kilohertz to 21195 kilohertz, and that's plenty enough for just about everything you want to hear on the AM band to begin with. Of course, there is stuff up on the higher bands, but mostly what you're going to hear in the broadcast range is going to be between 2300 and 21195 kilohertz. And especially, at least for me, it is, even though I have a pretty substantial antenna. I have about 175-foot wire antenna, and I hear quite a few things on good days, and I've got some pretty distant targets in my log. So I think that's a big plus there. So, but anything I get, it's going to tune better in the middle range, say, from the 25 meters range, 41 meters range in there, and it's going to always tune pretty well within that band in the middle. So, which is pretty true of any wire antenna. And on FM, of course, it's your typical 760 megahertz to 108.0 megahertz. It has a 60 ohm speaker in it. It actually has a 3.5-inch speaker, it sounds great. It's a good speaker, kind of a throwback to the Super Radio, but the 629 is kind of like a Super Radio in miniature. That's what I'm going to call it. It doesn't have all the listening capability on the AM band or medium wave DX band, but we'll talk about that in a little while. But the speaker is really nice. It has a clock setting for both 12 and 24 hours. I keep mine on a 24-hour setting, and I have it in Zulu time or in UTC time. And that helps me track my logging times. It also has a record and playback where you can put a stick into it, or USB, or also an SD card as well. So you have a thumb drive. That's what I'm driving at. Sorry, and you'll have a thumb drive and put the thumb drive in there as well, and it can record and play back. I haven't used that too much, but for people who do medium wave DX, I know a lot of them do recordings of their favorite shows, so that's something to consider as well. It also has both a VFO on the side, so you have a knob for the VFO, but you also have direct entry keys on the front, which are over the main display, which I really like the main display. Again, that's primarily why I bought that radio. Is it has big numbers and it has a bright backlit display. You can see it really well. Um, it is AC/DC. It comes with a power cord as well. So you have that. And hang on one second. Pardon me. And it also has a huge display, which I said it's 3.5 inches wide by 1 inch, and the back display is backlit. And it has a lot of other features besides that. Um, the Rotecus radio is a DSP radio. Well, for us radio connoisseurs, well, what exactly does that mean? Well, it kind of means our radio world is turning digital in more ways than one. But let me explain what a DSP filter is. I wasn't really familiar with it too much until I played with the Rotecus, and I learned a little bit more about what it meant to have a DSP filter in there. So the DSP filter is simply a filter which takes the analog signal and it turns it digital, but it has the ability to soften some of the interference coming in. But as a lot of you know, you might say, well, how is that possible? Because usually, when you turn up the gain, you might gain the voice or gain the audio, but you're also gaining the garbage that comes in behind it, and you have to figure it out. But with DSP, what they did is they figured out how to filter some of that background noise while enhancing the voice. And does it do that? Does it pick up the speech patterns? Well, I have to say yes, it absolutely does. And but like any other situation with radio waves, the stronger signal is going to get the lollipop, so to speak. So that the stronger signal is going to come in over a weaker signal, and it does work that way. Of course, mine I have, like I said, I have a very substantial antenna. I also filter that, or I tune the wire antenna through a home built tuner, and I also have an audio on my audio end, which also acts as an amplifier and cleans up some of the static coming out on that end. And it's also digital, so it kind of works in the same way. So I'm kind of cleaning it up on both ends. I'm cleaning up the signal. It's cleaning up the signal on DSP and cleaning out the signal on the other end from the audio, and it actually works pretty well. But I really, really recommend for the best signal, you must have an outside antenna. Okay, so it does a good job of isolating the radio signal on its actual frequency without splatter to the adjacent frequency. One strange thing it does is when you're on a channel and you have audio on it and you start spinning the dial, that audio tends to stay on until you stop. You have to stop the knob and let the channel reset before you can move on, because for some reason it's really strange. It carries the audio, so that's maybe a little bit of a downside until you realize that you have that issue. So once you get used to it, it's not that bad. But anyhow, the 629 is really sensitive with distant stations as well. But there's a caveat to this: is that you need a decent antenna, and as I said before, you need to have a tuner. But assessing the 629 on shortwave AM and FM, the 629 really works best on shortwave. For AM radio DXers, they might not find this really attractive, or the DSP attractive, because um, it may do a good job on stronger signals on AM, but medium wave DXers, I should say, are hunting for weak signals in odd parts of the band, trying to pick things up. And the DSP, if the audio signal falls below the noise floor, then the DSP is probably going to filter it out, recognizing it as voice. But that's just So for a medium wave DXer, is this something you might be interested in? Well, maybe not. It just depends. But it also does respond well and tune well to an AM loop, like an AN 200 text send loop, because I have one that I use, and it is really responsive to that. So if you're trying to tune the weaker station in, that might be a way also to do it. But anyway, okay, so that's my 2 cents on the Rotecus 629 AM FM shortwave radio. And with that, I'll be ending this broadcast. I really appreciate everybody listening in radio in this portion of Radio Spotlight. Everybody have a great weekend. Stay safe out there.